Hey, listeners, before we get started today, I want to give a quick shout out and word to our sponsor, our very first sponsor, Rapido Solutions Group. Danny Frisco and Roberto Icaza, two longtime friends of mine, guys I've known for 10 plus years, the CEO and COO respectively and co-founders of Rapido Solutions Group. These guys know what they're doing. I'm excited to be partnered with them to give you a little glimpse into their business. Rapido connects logistics and supply chain organizations in North America with the best nearshore talent to scale efficiently, operate on par with U.S.-based teams, and deliver superior customer service. These guys work with businesses from all sides of the industry, 3PLs, carriers, logistics, software companies, whatever it may be. They'll build out a team and support whatever roles you need, whether it's customer, carrier sales support, back office, or tech services. These guys know logistics. They know people. It's what sets them apart in this industry. They're driven by an inside knowledge of how to recruit, hire, and train within the industry and a passion to build better solutions for success. In the current market conditions where everyone is trying to be more efficient, do more with less, nearshoring is the latest and greatest tactic that companies are deploying to do so, and Rapido is a tremendous solution for you. So check them out at gorapido.com. And thank you again for being a sponsor to our show, a great partner. We look forward to working with you. And to our listeners, that's it. Let's get the show on the road. Welcome back to another episode of the Freight Pod. I'm your host, Andrew Silver. I am joined today by Shannon Breen. This is going to be a special episode because this episode will take us over 50,000 downloads during the Freight Pod history. So this one, we have to make this one a good one, my man.
A lot of pressure from you all the time whenever I share a stage or a mic with you. A lot of pressure from you, a top down.
This is only our second time, but I enjoy applying a little bit of pressure. So we're going to do great here. So I'm going to let you introduce yourself. This is the second interview I've now done that is a result of a panel I moderated a few months back for the Reliance Trucking guys. But I got to meet some really great people, some great executives at that conference on that panel. And before it was Jason Provencher, now it's Shannon Breen, and I just really. Frankly, a lot of what I heard you say resonated with me, and I felt like it'd be really great to kind of highlight your story. So I'm really glad you're giving me some time today. Let our audience get to know you a little better, get to know your business, FreightVana, better. We'll start with an easy one for you. So just kind of walk us through your background and how you kind of got to where you are today. I may jump in and throw some questions at you, but let's just start there.
Yeah, well, hey, number one, thanks for having me. I think the real story, just so we can clear that up, is we sat on stage and you said, hey, if anybody wants to be on the pod, don't screw this up. That's how you really started your moderation career, or at least for this particular event. So that was the pressure I was talking about. But no, for me, man, I grew up, parents were school teachers, background in finance, and always had entrepreneurial dreams. So for me, I always thought about franchising. I'd own my own business and dozens of franchises. I'd manage them all. And that was kind of my dream coming out of high school and even college. And just economics didn't work out. The money needed to start it, and just never got over the kind of that next level when I looked at doing that. And so did some work in my 20s, was an entrepreneur, window covering companies, real estate, and kind of like people talk about a lot in the entrepreneurial journey, man. Like fail a lot, you fail fast. Sometimes you fail hard, like when you're in real estate and you're 28 years old in 2008. So, some of those experiences, those are the ones that teach you a lot. And so I ended up going back into full-time finance, working for 3, 4, 5 years. And then a friend of mine at the time was kind of rising through the ranks at Night Transportation and said, like, hey, I think it'd be really interesting if you came over here. And I said, I don't know anything about freight. I know nothing about trucks. I know nothing about supply chain. He's like, that's not what really the skills you need to be successful, but like, come meet with us. And so ended up starting my career in the summer of 2012 for Night Transportation. Worked on the logistics side. We were on the green screens for some of your audience that's used to the AS400 and the F keys. That was our operating system. Some new systems were emerging, and you can appreciate this in your kind of new role and functionality, but some new systems were emerging. But really, unless you were like a stalwart mainstay player, right, your CHs and this, like they had all the systems, all the data, and you were just honestly playing so far from behind, at least the green screens I was on. So, uh, worked on projects like that. Long story short, Andrew, and just kind of grew the business. Worked on the merger in 2017 with Swift and got an opportunity to learn so much. For anybody that's, for me, the merger, we'll maybe unpack this in our convo, like the merger was just an education at a different level, right? Just way better than college, learning so much on the fly about yourself and people and systems and at scale with Night Swift. That was amazing learning ground and proving ground. So did that, oversaw intermodal, so that was my first foray into assets. And then in 2021, man, from a career arc perspective, felt like did a lot in corporate America and I wanted to step out and I just felt like in the face of a recession, why not try to build a logistics company? It sounded like a lot of fun. So,
And that's how FreightVana became
yeah,
FreightVana.
kind of. Yeah. And,
So let's go back to your kind of entrepreneurial
yeah.
dreams. What do you think kind of drove that itch for
I
you?
think my father. So my father was a school
Okay.
teacher, but in order to make money, enough money on the summers, he was just always doing something. Right, had a side business. So was going to buy and sell and refurbish weight equipment. He was going to work at a car lot. He was going to like my dad was he was all about that work, but like that's how he filled the gaps. And this was before year-round school, so you had these big blocks of time in the summer. And so I watched my dad on that hustle for a long time. Um, and then also respected obviously the most of the year when he was teaching fifth grade for a majority of his career for multiple decades. So for me, that kind of was like, man, I love that. I had an uncle that was big in entrepreneurialism, had some franchising, and so for me, I think between my dad and seeing some family members and just loving the business aspect and kind of having the controls and being able to watch the scale, like that always really was a draw for me.
And you said you made a few attempts at entrepreneurialism with I think you said a window covering
Yeah.
business and dabbling in real estate, and experienced some failure there. Can you talk a little bit about some of the lessons you learned through those entrepreneurial attempts that you've kind of carried with you?
Yeah, I'd say on the window covering side, right? We just had these massive contracts. Now, window covering and and the real estate careers all ended really in the same fall of the same year, 2008, because we had big contracts with like REITs, real estate investment trusts, and we were doing some contract work with window coverings. Plus, Phoenix pre 2008 was booming, right? So we had residential and commercial contracts. Really cool opportunity. I think the thing that I would share that's a positive that I learned is we had no business winning that contract with like the real estate investment trust, right? None. Like no experience, no real commercial work. The guy is doing an RFP, our version of an RFP in our world, right? And everybody else turns in their rates and stuff on spreadsheets, right? Here's your like we would do today. You got your Excel spreadsheet, there's your rates, there you go. Like that's me in this. I knew that I had to like show out on this, and we'd never done a commercial bid before. So I literally walked every property, measured all the windows and all the different sizing types. I put it took pictures of the properties, color printed it, put it in a binder, packaged it up, laminated the whole thing. And I walked into this dude's office, and he just has stacks of different people that had turned their bids in. And then I give him this folder, and he was like, "Damn." He's like, and he says these words to me. I'll never forget it, Andrew. I think it's a special thing. He's like, I got all these papers and faxes and emails from these other people. You walked the property, bit this folder together. You haven't earned the business, but I'm going to tell you something. If you're willing to work this hard just to show up to tell me why you should have my business, I already believe that you're the one that should do this job for us. And I landed a multi 7-figure window covering contract at a young age when we had never done commercial before because of that level of like persistence and preparation. And that lesson from a positive perspective, I always remembered, hey, if you want to show up like everybody else, then show up like everybody else. But it really has instilled in me this ability to like, hey, be special, be memorable, do the extra work. That's what people are going to remember when you want to win and earn their business. So that's the positive part of that story.
I mean, that's a valuable lesson. And I'm curious how you have applied that in your business today at FreightVana.
Yeah, I think you see So, I mean, we do that in our bids. I certainly do it. I don't write any canned emails. We don't do any blast emails. Like everything that I do is uh, got that level of personality and care and specificity to it, right? Like I'm really focusing on whoever we're reaching out to. So I carried that with us when we look at our bid results and like how we show backup for our customers. We spend an extraordinary amount of time packaging up stuff, highlighting where we think we fit best. Now, you've done this game a long time and at bigger scales than me. Whether or not the customers actually digest what you give them, much like that younger story I just told you, it's not really the point. The point is when they see it, they at least, for most, not all, for most and some, will appreciate the level of work and diligence that you put in. And those are things they don't forget. Whether they award you the business or not, the way you show up matters. And so we absolutely have done that as a team, myself, and as we've continued to kind of grow in the face of really tough freight market. So
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more with that sentiment. I always thought about bids as such an interesting concept in freight, in that, you spend so much time on the pricing itself, and you feel like that's really the work. Um, but when you do boil it down to a submission, and it's an Excel spreadsheet that you turn in, whether it's through Jagger or Coupa or whatever platform they're using, it can, if you let the work just be the bid pricing itself, it can just be a spreadsheet that 100 people turn in, and then you're just a number on a piece of paper. And it was constantly a conversation within our business to try to figure out a way to go the extra mile in that final delivery of the bid. And whether it was an email with a personal touch, or you were sending something in, snail mail, whatever it was, trying to find a way to stand out was a crucial part of it. And I like your comment around most of the time, or even some of the time, that counted for something. And I think it's worth noting that when it doesn't count for something, it's okay. It doesn't mean that your effort was not worth it. Not everybody is going to appreciate the level of care and detail that extra effort results in, but not to quit doing so because of that. Because you might only get the extra benefit 1 out of 10 times, but it's worth it when you do.
really
And those people who are the 1 out of 10, those are the true partners that in the lifespan of your relationship, it will come back to you. People who appreciate that level of effort tend to give it back, in how they carry themselves and how they navigate the relationship with you. Do you kind of agree with that thought
100%.
process?
And you also don't, even if in the short, I go short, middle, long term, right? Because I've been having conversations with people now. I mean, we just passed our 3-year anniversary here at FreightVana, right? Like, and I'm having
Congrats.
conversations now with people or getting onboarded with people. And if I go back to our first contact, and you know this too, like you're talking years. So no matter how I showed up was a no, but maybe they didn't forget. And hey, maybe, and I'll joke with them, hey, maybe you just wanted me to prove myself first. Maybe you just wanted me to get to hear first. Maybe you just, right? Like, hey, I appreciate it. Thank you. Because really what you did is you made me better. Now I'm better. Hey, now can we talk? Right? Like that's the level. And look, people appreciate that. At the end of it, and we talk a lot, and we were on our panel and we talked about it. Um, we can commoditize a lot of things in this industry, but people are tribal creatures. They want to work with good people. And if we're being really honest about those rates on the spreadsheet, it is not like oranges and apples, man. Like the rates are getting so tight and so narrow. Like, yeah, there's a little bit here and a little bit there. But if you did like a standard analysis of that, it's a tight band. So then if it's a tight band, and I believe you did this very well. Like, not, I'm not gaslighting, but I believe you did this well. Like, you were like, hey, my team, my previous team, like we will execute. We will give customer service at an elite level. Hey, prices are going to be prices, but like here's what you'll get from my team. And I think that is differentiation. Too many folks either attempt to enter on price or sell themselves on price while price matters, and they forget that the real differentiation is the people, the diligence, some of the stuff that we're talking through in this thread. Because if all you're selling on is price, I don't know. Like you might get the opportunity, but like you probably can't convert it to many things called profits. That's probably not going to end up being a good thing. And there's so many people lined up behind you, and we saw it with many logos that you and I know well. As soon as you go to adjust price, you got 10 people right
See
behind
ya.
you in line, and they'll just swap you out. So what did you get? Right? What did you get? And so
Yeah.
I've been very intent here at FreightVana on differentiating our brand, differentiating on our investments, differentiating on how we show up, much like we talked here. And it doesn't work for everybody. But for those it works with, to your point, some of the deepest special relationships, even won some awards, which is wild. Like it's a testament to like knowing what you want to be and like living the creed.
Yep. 100%. And we're going to get into all that. We're going to talk about, I know a recent award you guys won. We're going to get there, but I don't want to go fully into FreightVana yet. We're going to walk through some of your
Okay.
journey a little bit before, because I think there's some really interesting stuff here. And I like to try to go chronologically as much as we
Okay.
can. So let's talk a little bit about Night Swift and your journey into that business. What were your thoughts as you came into freight? I mean, as you mentioned before, this was something completely foreign to you. But take me back to, I think you said
Summer of 12.
2012 when you
Yeah.
joined. Yeah. So what was take me back to that early experience, what you were doing for the business, and kind of what it was like back then.
Yeah, well, I mentioned the green screens. I think for me, the thing that I gravitated to was the people and the pace. So in my younger years, out in college and whatnot, I worked in a restaurant. So I love the pace and the chaos and the people and the problem solving. Now, as I was working that finance career before the summer of 12, like it didn't have the pace, it didn't have the people, and it didn't have like those levels of dynamics, problem solving. So I felt immediately in that summer when I walked in, and it was chaotic, right? Running a brokerage, and I just loved like the buzz, right? I love the energy. I love the open rooms. You're no longer in an office doing FP&A. Now you're like on a floor, and you're like, okay. So that really drew me back to the restaurant, and then like every sports field I ever grew up on, right? It's like, all right, like let's go compete as a squad, right? And I think that's a part. Certain personalities just absolutely love that about logistics, and for me, I was like, all right, I dig this. So I worked on multiple projects, but really, when I get down to it, it was the pace and the people, and that team environment. You just in certain corporate environments, you start to lose that. Yeah, everybody's got teams, and you're part of a bigger team, but like doesn't feel like pickup basketball, right? And this felt like pickup basketball. Like things are coming at you, you're solving stuff, you're in the fire, and I just particularly love that. So that was really my love, where my love started for logistics, and where I really started to dive in.
And what was your first actual job at Night
Yeah, so
Logistics?
I had a unique job because we were still a growing business, but one of my core jobs was the logistics company was almost the redheaded stepchild of the brand, right? So working inside the walls of one of the larger trucking companies in the country, it was like we've got logistics, we've got trucking. Logistics, you're in the back office. Customers are different. This is different. We don't trust you. So really, one of my core jobs and functionalities was bringing a level of continuity to from our asset business to our logistics, and then honestly more even internally than externally, building that trust between planners, account managers, salespeople, because we just really frankly didn't have much of that confidence back in 12, for what we could be. Multiple leadership changes. So one of my core jobs was just like how to build that bridge, in order for us to work as a larger effective team instead of just a unit within kind of standalone, which I see a lot of people still struggle with today. So that was really my core functional job when I started.
So there's a trend or a theme in logistics organizations that try to do both, that try to do asset and brokerage. And it is typical that one is viewed as kind of a stepchild, and it's not often that you see both just running in tandem super effectively, and doing very well. Especially as you get to larger assets that have a brokerage, it's often treated as kind of an overflow business, where they're just taking on spot business that the assets can't handle. and it's challenging for the brokerage typically to develop strong carrier relationships and a carrier network because when the market's hot, you might have plenty of freight available to give to your carriers, but as soon as the market slows down, your own assets eat up all the freight, and you're kind of left there telling your carriers, like, sorry, go somewhere else. So, can you talk a little bit about your perspective on that topic and maybe why it's so challenging for an asset business to build a strong brokerage in tandem, and kind of what some of the things you are doing to try to create that positive impact?
Yeah, I think you hit it spot on, and it's that market inflection and the need. So number one, you think about a totem pole effect in those organizations, the capital investment, what the public markets want to see be most successful. Obviously, the drivers are all employees. Your third party carriers are certainly not, as we both know. So, like, from a prioritization, it's very easy to get stacked and racked the exact way you did. And in some ways, and I've shared this analogy with some folks, fair or not fair, but my perspective, it's almost like building sandcastles, but too close to the ocean. Because that market swing is the ocean, right, Andrew? And when it comes in, right, and it pulls out, a lot of the things that you highlighted in your piece there is absolutely true, because your carriers are not as important as the dedicated fleet. Your carriers are not important as certain terminal in their asset driver. And so naturally, as that tide is receding, let's call it the market tide, along with it goes both your freight and a lot of your carrier relationships. And many a times I did three of these. I was not around to do the fourth, which they're probably in the midst of, but and many are. And then they just look at you, and be like, "Oh, but you can build it again, and you can build it again, and you can build it again." So one of a few driving forces that I'm sure we'll unpack as far as FreightVana was like, man, I feel like I'm really good at certain things and building, but I don't necessarily want to be a rebuilder all the time. What could it look like if we built certain functionality and certain teams and certain tech? And I worked in an environment where that tide didn't just pull out, and with it all of the things that you mentioned. And that was an intoxicating idea for someone that I felt like I had decent success inside of a corporate environment with all the benefits, but it was like, how could it be done independently, standalone, right? Like a pure play. And that for both people, carriers, customer relationships was just a driving force that, like, oh, I think that would be special if I can do that without the gravitational pull of the earth.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of I hear what you're saying. Can you talk a little bit more about the night experience and specifically thinking about what were some of the best parts
Yeah.
of that business that, you're clearly there was something in the experience you had that made you maybe a freight person for life, at least for now. And I'm just curious, like, what were some of the best characteristics of that business that you have tried to carry with you, and bring with you into your next
Yeah, on
venture?
trucking, and I think this is a good one. I think discipline, right? I think there's zero doubts why a decade or more ago, when people looked at trucking companies, most efficient trucking companies, operating OR, and all the stats are out there, but Kevin Knight and Knight Transportation stood above the rest, and so there was a level of discipline, fiscal discipline, that I think he deployed. Sometimes that was all great, sometimes not so great, but that discipline allowed Kevin and those teams to scale to, right, at some over 4,000 trucks, one of the most profitable at 4,000 trucks. And he and that business became really the one that everybody would look at from a litmus test perspective. So that discipline, I think, sticks out among anything else. I mean, we get into people and culture, and, like, I mean, if anybody's ever met Keith Knight, one of the greatest humans, like, ever, right? Like, what a special man that, like, cared about everybody he worked with. Like, I loved all of that, and that founder story, and getting the chance to walk into his office, and just amazing, right? But that discipline, functionally from a business perspective, learning that and getting to experience that, and then doing a merger and figuring out how to, like, meld that inside the walls of Swift and work with different collaborative teams, like, that would be the thing that sticks out amongst anything else.
So before we jump into the merger, because I want to spend a little bit of time there, just to give me a little bit of an elaboration. Is that a word? Elaborate a little bit for me on um, discipline and what it really means to be disciplined as now as a startup
Yeah.
organization. What does that look like in decision making or on
All
paper?
things, right? And I'll start with a standard P&L, right? Just your biggest expenses, right? Hey, if we're going to buy trailers, we're going to try to get them to be the most effective and the cheapest. Like every single notch turned was a focus on being better than the competition and making sure you could lower over your unit production, unit costs, right? Unit measurement costs. So every single thing that we did there was focused on that. There's even like a more of a cultural piece. Like you didn't go spend big money on dinners. You didn't travel in first class. You didn't like, right? It was very well tied to, hey, like we have drivers, we support the drivers. This is what we need to do to operate the best, and like we all need to fall in line with like that type of um, cost discipline that comes with it. So I'd say equipment and fuel and all the natural things, facilities, spending, all the things, but even culturally, just the side pieces would all flow too, where people would be very cognizant of dollars going out. It definitely wasn't loose and fast. Even though they had money and they were making money and they were profitable, like you never got that feeling. Like it was almost like you played, I mean, no different than startup, right? When you've lived there, and I've like when you really don't have it, and you have to, So they'd almost been able to carry over that startup feel for decades, even though hey, it's kind of climbed and proven themselves and made profits and quote unquote maybe been better than others at running trucking companies at that size. They'd always kind of kept that kind of idealism of like a startup, like hey, we don't got it, like and we don't have it to waste. So I really respected that.
Yeah, and it sounds like too there's some lead by example in there from the top in how they chose to operate. That became a clear indicator for everyone else how they
Mm-hmm.
should.
Yeah. And then other people had
So,
a tough time assimilating with that because that's a big change process that most organizations in flow have a really hard time changing to.
yeah. All right, well, let's now talk a little bit about the acquisition before we move
Yeah,
on to kind of your current role in business. Um, that's one of the largest acquisitions in our industry's history, right? Knight
it
Swift.
is.
Can you talk a little bit about what that experience was like and kind of how you saw it play out and what you saw as some of the major benefits of it, some of the challenges of it?
Yeah. I mean, benefits, wild benefit that I mean goes unspoken, but I think is a huge one is just pure location, right? Most times you do a merger, and you've seen them all in our space. You've got headquarters in different cities and this and that. I mean, I think as a crow flies, you're talking 20 miles at most, right, between two headquarters of companies that competed for years. So, number one, location was a huge, massive benefit because now you could be in multiple offices in one day. You didn't need people flying all over the country. Like you could create that team type atmosphere very quickly. Naturally, Swift had all the size that Knight didn't have, almost 3 or 4x in regards to driver count. The part that I found particularly interesting and I wanted to lean into because some of my peers in the space, large asset based companies, had already kind of really leaned into this was the power only piece, right? And Jerry Moyes, by amassing one of the largest trucking load companies in the country, was falling a little bit on seated driver count, but the trailer network was massive, right, Andrew? And so they had so many uh, trailers that were sitting out there in the marketplace that were able to be utilized. And so at that point, I went to Adam and I said, hey, now's the time. We've got to build this. So one of the big opportunities there, naturally, you're going to gain the size and all the breadth of connecting, the asset networks and logistics networks and figuring out all this massive freight flow that most people could only imagine, right? But secondarily, they also had the equipment and the breadth nationwide, coast to coast, that then now I could build technology to tap into and work internally to make sure, much like I did my early career, right? Build those bridges internally so that we could build that trust to start to create different types of freight flows and then certainly use that equipment to the best of its abilities and maximize a lot of the profits and opportunities that existed in those walls. So for me, those were really intriguing. The other one is just people, right? I mean, I've never had to walk into a team I remember my first day, I'm walking through Swift, and one of the guys is pretty bold, and he looks at me. He's like, two questions. He's like, where are you going to be sitting, and how many of us are still going to be here? And you're like, and I mean, I'm just on a walkthrough, man. Like, it's not even fun. Like, we're on like diligence. I mean, it's all announced and all that, and we're doing our thing. But I just remember those two, and I just remember I paused. I was like, I never even met this cat, right? Bold dude. And I was like, oh wow, like I've never done this before. Like that is, I have to start processing. So a lot of sleepless nights as I started to think about like how, from a cultural perspective, do I build this bridge, get the results needed, but not have everybody walking around on eggshells like we've seen so many times in our careers and the stories and friends we have in the industry. Like as soon as certain things happen, then the culture is just it's in this weird spot where no one's really able to give their best because they're so concerned about their self or their friend, and that I didn't want. So I worked really hard um, to learn and then build those bonds and then breed confidence. And then to your point, lead by example, right? On meeting different people and really not sitting in an office. I spent a ton of time on the floor, shaking hands, sitting with people, taking people to lunch, like really doing all the things necessary to let them know, like, this isn't a chop shop. That's not my job, but like, I need to know what you're about. And let me tell you what I'm about. And like, I hope those two things intersect. So that was a really cool education.
So, I mean, you hit on some great points there. The last one around, someone as soon as you walk in asking you how, basically, if he still has a job or how many people on his team still have a job. It resonates so much. I mean, when I think about any acquisition that takes place in our industry, that's typically an employee's first thought. The one who's acquired
Yeah.
is thinking, "Is my job safe?" Um, and I think companies need to do a better job of getting out in front of that type of thing. And it's not to say that if you plan on, there's going to be overlap sometimes. And in fact, most of the time when an acquisition takes place, there's overlap and there's going to be a need for some level of turnover. But there's just a way that I think leaders can be way more empathetic and communicate in a fashion that is a bit more transparent. Not so far as to say, hey, this group is going to be laid off tomorrow, but um, at least to be more understanding. I don't have I've been through a few acquisitions now. I forgot about one. Whenever I spoke about this on the podcast in the past, I forgot about when Coyote bought Access America, and then also when Coyote was acquired by
Mm-hmm.
UPS, and then finally when my own business Molo was acquired by ArcBest. Each of those was unique in
Yeah.
its own right, but each had benefits and each had challenges. And I just think that companies, especially acquirers, need to do a better job of, or at least the way to get the most out of an acquisition is to get buy-in from the people you're acquiring. And the way to get buy-in from the people you're acquiring is to communicate that with them as authentically and transparently as you can about why you bought them, what you want out of them, and open your ears and listen to them to understand like what are the really good things about their business. You can only find out so much in due diligence, and oftentimes you don't get to meet most of the team. You get to meet the most senior leaders in the organization who give you their perspective, but they don't always have all the answers. And so, one of the things I tried to do when we were acquired, and Molo's deal was meant to kind of be a reverse acquisition where we were taking over their brokerage. But like I tried to get in front of as many of their people as possible to understand like what they liked and didn't like about their current roles, the business they'd been
Mm-hmm.
in, the way the business was run, and try to keep that in mind as you're leading so that you can make decisions with everybody's best interests in mind. It's just hard to make decisions with everyone's best interests in mind if you don't spend the time getting to know these people and understand their interests. So I don't know. I guess that's my 2 cents on acquisitions in the space. What would
No,
you add
I
to
think
that?
you highlight it. Most time and most businesses and even most acquisitions follow suit. It is top down. And there is not enough time. You use the key words: communication, empathy, authenticity. And those scorecards would lack if you rated most teams that step in on acquisitions. And I think you see that in some of the pain post acquisition when then you get to a certain point years down the road and it's like, wait, we didn't get all the synergies we were asking for. We didn't get, oh, where's all this happening? Like then the same top down, but you didn't spend the commensurate time. Literally, almost, I would almost flip the triangle, and I don't know how you do it. I was able to do it because of the size. At certain size, you mentioned UPS Cody. I don't know, but I really think that mentality of the flipping the triangle and thinking about it from the ground up would be much more advantageous for companies as they look to spend all this money. Because at the end of the day, we really think about it, regardless of culture, and they're trying to turn it into a accretive investment. And what we've seen in some of the recent ones, those are what we would call non-accretive in value, right? Those are actually losing value from where they started. And then I think doing the autopsy for our industry, guys like us, and really being able to figure out how do you do this better, because we've seen a really couple bad examples of not done well, or there's another one where it's just everything keeps running independently and there really are no synergies. So like there's barbells, right? It's we've tried to do it, we failed, or you be you and we'll be us, but we're all under the same umbrella, and even that doesn't really bring out the best. So I think bottom up is interesting the way you frame it. I know it worked for me personally. I didn't do one at the size and scale, but I still think if it's done at a micro level, you can expand that thought process and have that be a cultural piece that you embed into your next acquisition, or if you're being acquired. And I think there's ways to make it much more functional than I've seen it over the last 13 years in the industry.
I agree wholeheartedly. Anything you want to add to the night conversation before we move on to
No, I
FreightVana?
mean, look, great place, great learning ground. We talk about FreightVana, we'll talk about Power Only, got a chance to learn that there. Most of the relationships I have with a lot of people in the industry, obviously I'm 3 years in here and, almost 10 years at Night Swift, all were foundational from my time there. So learned a lot. And then, look, I've got a large amount of teammates here as we manage these assets and we're growing in a certain way that all carry that same kind of bloodline, if you will, from a logistics perspective. And so kudos to that place for, what it taught all of us. We're obviously doing a different thing now, but I learned a lot, and I wouldn't be in logistics if it wasn't for Adam, who's now, the CEO of the whole shooting match. So kudos to him. He's the one that brought me in. So I think I always got to be forever grateful for finding this really dope industry.
Of course.
He brought me into it. He started out of college. I came in, 8, 9 years later. So I'm forever grateful for that place for what it did for me and what I learned.
Very cool. Well, you'll have to get a bug in his ear that I want him on the podcast. So
yeah, you'd have to figure out how he'd answer a call. So.
All right. Well, let's move on to your current baby.
Yeah.
Your venture into entrepreneurship or re-entry into entrepreneurship with FreightVana. Let's start with an easy one, which is why the name FreightVana? What does that mean?
Man, I'd love to tell you there's some sexy stories. So I love marketing. I love sales. No offense to anybody out there, but like the XYZ logistics or last name logistics or all of that, like I grew up, I watched Matt do Arrive. I watched you with Molo, and I loved having like a name that wasn't like standard. So number one, I was like, it can't be XYZ, and it cannot be a name. Like it got to have something that's good. Out here locally, a car brand, not B2B, but B2C, right? Carvana was obviously growing like crazy.
Mm-hmm.
There's T-Vana, there's all these other Vanas. And I was literally in the gym one day working out in the morning, and I don't know what hit me. And I literally said it in my head. I was just sitting there and I was like, FreightVana. And I was like, it was one of those moments, honestly, so there was no why. I was constantly kind of chewing through different ideas. And when I said it, it was one of those moments, two things happened. Wildly excited. I'm like, because in my head, I'm like, I haven't heard something that I like better, right? So I'm processing, and I'm like, slow down, get to a computer. Surely, that thing's eaten up. Someone's got this, so let's just relax. And I start playing in my head. I'm like, I could see the FR8 if we wanted to play it. but like I loved it, right? It had a ring to it. Vana meant gold and quality, and I'm like, dude, this people know, we move freight like gold standard, like whatever it is. So I was like, dude, FreightVana, and so ran back to the computer. Long story short, it wasn't taken, and I was just like obsessed with making that the reality at every level because I was like, it just had an epiphany, and it was like, and it was open, and I was like, that's the one. And I told John at the time, I was like, hey, and John's not the marketer, but I was like, hey, you come up with something better, let me know. But like this is what I'm thinking. And he was like, oh, I dig it. So, and it was born.
Very cool. I like that story. And I assumed there was some kind of Carvana tie there, so it makes sense there was an origin there. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's using that as inspiration. I mean, Molo came from the app Touch of Modern, Tomo,
Oh, okay.
Modern Logistics. Tomo, it was just an app I had on my phone. I thought it was cool how it was capital T, little O, capital M, little O. And I never bought anything from the app. It's a cool app. There's a lot of like kind
Weird
of
stuff.
guy
Yeah.
stuff
Like,
on there,
yeah.
like
Sand art
knives
and
and
all kinds of weird
pens
things.
and belts. Yeah, all sorts of funky stuff. But it was, we borrowed or used that as inspiration to come up with Molo. So I'm a fan of the kind of uniqueness of the name. It definitely stands out.
Yeah.
So
And then,
tell me about why.
okay.
Tell me about why you even chose to start a business. Like what was kind of the impetus for
Yeah.
that? What was the conversation like with your team? I know you didn't just start it as by yourself. There were, I think, quite a few of you starting day one. So
Yeah.
kind of take me back to 2021 when
Yeah.
that
Well, so
came to
John and I
be.
resigned. I think this is the story. It's a fun story to tell for anyone that thinks it's like and it's never a gilded story, up and to the left as they like to tell it, right? We resigned in January of 21. We had no funding, right? Knew we needed to go get funding, but had no commitments on funding, had no customers, didn't have anything. It was just John and I when we quit. And so we spent the next months seeking funding, right? Friends and family, making the phone calls, high net worth individuals, friends of friends. And so we went out for the next 3 months and then figured out like who would end up investing in the business. So that was really the gap between starting FreightVana, because in order to start it, you do need some dollars. And I didn't want to do, and this is total respect to all the bootstrappers out there, like had some dollars, and I appreciate it, but it starts with one and then two and then three. But like people are like, oh, you bootstrap, like very clear and direct. Like, no, we did not bootstrap it. Like we got the raise, came back. We hired 2 dozen people on day one, to your point. People that all made this like radical bet on this silly name that you mentioned, FreightVana, uh, myself and others really making a bet on themselves and starting a business with truly no TMS, no customers, no contracts in hand, right? And just 2 dozen people. So I kind of explained it to like people because they're like, man, like your team is just a certain way, and I was like, the way I would explain it is kind of like the Navy, right? Like there's the Navy and then there's the SEALs. I was like, you realize like if I'm putting my life on the line of building a business, like what people do you think I'm going to surround myself with? Like what people do you think I'm going to sit at their kitchen tables and be like, hey, I need you here? Like probably the best of the best, right? I mean, I've had 10 years experience, so pretty good ability to assess like talent and capabilities, I felt like after 10 years. So it really gave me a cool opportunity to find that 2 dozen people that wanted to start. Um, and we did. So they all started, which was a unique story. Most people's spark story or whatever terminology you want to use there does not sound like 2 dozen people starting with them on day one.
So there's an interesting thing you said there that reminds me of my own
Okay.
story, and it's talking about how when you first started the business and you wanted to have the best of the best sitting beside you because you were ready to put your life on the line and risk it all to make this business happen. But the funny thing is, at least for me, and we had 2017 was when we started, so I had about 10 years experience at
Yeah.
the time, and I thought I knew a
Yeah.
lot. And to be honest, I think I didn't have a ton of respect at the time. And I think that was self-earned lack of respect from being such a shithead in my early 20s. I was a good sales guy, but I was kind of a shithead. I was partying and not great. And my point though is, when I look at 3, 4, 5 years
Yeah.
later when we actually had a business. Because day one, you have nothing. Day one, you have a silly name like Molo or FreightVana. You have your 10 years experience and a couple people beside you, but nobody really believes in you. Nobody really believes that you are going to accomplish what maybe you had a different, but for me, everybody thought I was an idiot and that there was no chance that what we were going to do was going to work. My own father literally said, "This is a bad idea. You should not do this." And you have to be willing to say, screw all that. Like, I believe in myself, and you find the people who will believe in it too. But the number of people is way smaller than 3 years later when you've got a business doing $100 million or $200 million in revenue, and all of a sudden they're like, oh, maybe that guy wasn't so dumb, and his team is doing great work. They've got a good presence in the market, and I want to go work with them. So when I look at the first 50 people we hired, there was a lot of turnover in that
50 or
group because
15?
the talent paled. 50
Yeah.
is the number
Yeah.
I'm using. But that first 50, the turnover was way higher because the talent, frankly, paled in comparison to the people we were able to get 3 to 4 years later once we had a real business. And the few that did make it through, we had so much more appreciation for. And frankly, they got that appreciation through equity that paid off for them. But I just am curious if now that you're a few years
Yeah.
into your journey, you feel like it's a little different in how you're able to recruit and retain talent because you do have a real
Yeah.
business versus where you were when you
I call
started.
it you're walking through an interesting thing I would have never, you plan on, but I don't think you ever really get that far because you're so immersed in what you're doing. But it's an inflection point, right, Andrew? Like, and we've done it. We're living it today, right? I mean, not to disparage anybody, but like they get to certain points, and then hey, some people have decided this is not the train for them. Some people we've decided for them it's not the train for them. But as we built this brand, and like you've seen our a little bit of our culture from the outside and the marketing and how we position ourselves, and I think what's really cool is when people come in here, it's not wildly different. I think a lot of people I see like how they do the marketing or how they offer jobs, and then like I always find this huge disconnect between the actual reality of what that job is. I've really tried to be intent on that authenticity loop of like, hey, what you see is what you get, and like I am what you see here, and if you like that, no, cool, not, but like you walk in the office, that's what you're going to get. So point being, there is an interesting transition. Our company's doing it right now. We just passed 3 years, right? um, but now the inbound interest from very talented people, or when we have conversations, it's like, oh, wait, hold on, right? I mean, Alex Perry came over, who I think you know from DAT. He came over and he's our new VP of pricing and network. And Jody Morrow just joined the team, 12 years at Coyote.
Yep.
Um,
Great hire.
you know
Well
what I'm
done.
saying? And we're doing these national searches, and it's this wild experience, like you're saying, Andrew, where now these are not necessarily Alex, but with Jody, and like she's interested in us, and you're like, it's this weird thing that every entrepreneur has, and um, it's honestly that sometimes it doesn't make sense. You're like, you've earned it, right? You put yourself in there, that spot where you probably should assume it in your heart, you believe it, but it's almost this weird validation loop where folks like a Jody specifically will reach out, or we have through the process, and you're like, wait, you're interested in, like, this is the next, and then you meet them, and then like that then you just get this, really, it's a boost, because I'm telling you, like, Jody's been here 2 weeks, and our whole team is just, you could just like, your point is, it's got to be
Just
what a locker room feels
different
like
energy.
when that happens in sports, right? And I am not talented enough to sit in those locker rooms, but in this world, in our profession, it is that feeling where it's like, wow, okay, like, and then people start drawing lines forward, like, if this is like who can come to FreightVana next, what in the heck does it look like 2, 3, 4? Like, you start to do what the investors do as you've sat in those rooms, but instead you're looking at like talent and growth and the types of a team you can build, and like that is just something I just obsess over and just wildly excited about, and super humbled by too, incredibly humbled by.
Yeah, it's something I always told my team was that growth begets growth. And growth was not just important because we wanted to be a bigger business and because we wanted to see the number go from 20 million revenue to 100, but it was important for so many reasons. It was important because it created more opportunity for the team, whether that was financial or in the context of responsibility, in the ability to create new teams and promote more people. But it also attracted more talent. It attracted better talent and put you in a position where more quality people wanted to come join you. And having more quality people in a relationship business allows you to grow faster and to continue to keep your foot on the gas pedal. I think one thing that you mentioned that's really important is that kind of what you see is what you get. And it's one thing to go out on social media and say, hey, this is who we are, this is how we act, and this is what it's like to work for us. But I think most of LinkedIn is bullshit. And I think that I shouldn't say that, but I don't swear a ton on the show. And I do have to always mark the show as explicit when I'm posting it because occasionally
Does that
something
word
slips.
qualify though? That
But
one might be in range. I don't know if you need to mark that one.
yeah, I don't know, because kids, I don't know, whatever. My point though is that I think that LinkedIn has become a really interesting place where, a few people have exhibited a ton of authenticity and that's seen, and then you've got thousands of copycat people trying to do the same thing, and it doesn't come off as authentic. But my point is that like social media, LinkedIn is a place to find talent and to kind of exhibit who your organization is and what it stands for. And people love using buzzwords about transparency and communication and, all the things that they know check a box. But the behavior internally in the business is not often simpatico. It's not often replicated or reflected the same as it was communicated, publicly. And I think for me, one of the things that I loved about our team and kind of the social media presence was that like what we did say was represented by how we did behave in the business. And it earns you a lot of trust. It earns you a lot of rapport from your team and from people who want to join your team. And this is a tough business, but it's a people business, and it will forever be a people business. We will be able to automate so much of the business through technology, whether it's something you build internally on your own or it's a vendor you're buying from in this space. And there's going to be more and more of those vendors popping up as time goes on. That's great, but there will always be a person buying from another person, and the way that this industry will continue to differentiate will be through the people and the way that those people show up at work every day. So every one of our superpowers, whether it's at Molo or FreightVana or any other business, will be the people, how they relate to one another, how they work. So, I told you something when we first met at the panel
Big
that
compliment
I
to you, by the
hated
way.
your
Big compliment.
that, and this was something that was true as a competitor, and there were a lot of flaws in the way I competed, and I think some of it was how I view. I think there's a little bit of a childish way in how I viewed our competitors, and it was always with a little bit of hatred. I think about competitors a little differently now. I'm happy to even kind of amplify them as I'm trying to do with you now. But you guys came onto the scene with a kind of explosive social media presence, and your team was so out there and constantly posting and talking about how great FreightVana was and all that stuff. And as a competitor, I saw it was just like, who are these guys? Like, they suck. Like, whatever. There wasn't really a
They'll
basis
never
for that
last.
perspective. Yeah, they'll never last. But will you talk to me a little bit about that kind of social media presence your team had, and if that was directed, intentional, or how that came to be?
Wildly intentional. To go at the level that we did was but there's a reason by that intentionality is because we just knew. I mean, we all know the stats and how many brokers and how many all the how it's broken up and all that. And so it's like, how are you going to stick out? Once again, we talk about sticking out on how you show up in a bid. How are you going to stick up on the way you present yourself? And so Josh and I early on were like, and he had a passion for it, not an expertise in it. Truthfully, like Josh was doing recruiting, still does recruiting today, but he was like he had this real passion for like social and the arts, and he'd been studying. And this is kind of the rise. And you'll like this. You talked about touch of modern. Well, Barstool, there was nothing hotter than Barstool Sports, right? Barstool was just crushing the game, and so Josh is like, hey, Barstool, but like we've all got personalities. We can be fun and zany. Like it'll all still roll up to FreightVana, but like let's empower our people to just get out there and like have fun and goof around, and then let's highlight our trailers, and let's take these trailers that there's like millions of them that are just a freaking commodity that most people not in trucking, but even in trucking, it's just trailer, trailer, trailer. It's just commoditized. He's like, what if we made trailers like badass, like the stars of the show? And I was like, absolutely, right? And so now as you gain steam, so like we've always highlighted our equipment and where it's at, and then our community. And so we just really took that Barstool model and we're like, we want to go big, but we also, in order to do it, right? Because people will call me all the time, like, I want to do it. I'm like, you want to do it, but then you want to like, you got to be really careful. And there's some things, probably some learning lessons there, but you want to do it, but then there's all these risks. Like most corporations, large institutions, if you're owned by a publicly traded company, you'll say you want to do it. You probably don't really want to do it, right? Like that'll get shot down so fast. It won't be authentic. It won't be fun and zany. It'll be buttoned up. It'll have 5 levels of approvals, or it'll just be stale crackers, right? And who wants to consume that, right? Like it's just like anything else. It's either got to be fun and give value or entertainment, or it's just noise. And so we really went the whole full bore on, FV in the wild. And now we have people literally weekly for us because they like, hopefully like who we are and what we represent, what we're trying to do in the industry. We could post every single week online, FreightVana in the wild. I get texts 3-4 times a week like, bro, I saw you guys out. Like it is just the coolest for a trailer. And I'll be honest, and I'll probably like years from now, I hope we have another talk. Like, I don't think anybody's done it that way with a trailer in our industry. And so to kind of be a little bit of a pioneer in making that type of like trailers cool, highlight them, celebrate them, it's just so unique. And I think it's really a part of this fabric that we're building here, especially with what operationally we're building, which is a nice tie-in, right? It's not like ancillary to our core business model. It is literally the thing, but it's fun and it's zany and it's different. And then just the love and the community and the support we get from it. So the social thing was absolutely intentional. We came on the scene. Surely it's helped open doors. Surely it gets copycatted, right? It's just like sports, though. I tell people all the time, Andrew, and people copied what you've done, probably took pieces of it. Like it's sports. Like these teams are running plays. NFL teams run plays. It's only their play, maybe their play the first time they ran it. You don't think there's video of that? I mean, give me a break. Like there's 30 other teams that are watching the same play, that the same down and distance can run the same play. But I always say, then if the plays aren't the special one, then it's who and how they run them that makes it special. And so sometimes people are like, aren't you upset? Like people are doing this. And I feel like they're just like directly trying, like, we don't care, because at the end of the day, you got to run it better than us. You got to have people that follow it better than us. It's just like sports, like running the play. People feel like it's the trick. No, you got to run it. When do you run it? How do you run it? How effective do you run it? Who's running it? That's the stuff that really matters. And so social media is just one of the many things that we do special here. But it was an amazing compliment sitting on that stage, and we were in that group with Jason and even Matt, right, who I've known for years, and you have too. And
Yeah,
you're just like, you sons of bitches. Oh, I just did it again. Like you SOBs. Like I was like, who the heck are you guys? And it was cool to sit on that stage and share that story with you, man.
Yeah. So, I mean, I like the way you phrased that with the running the play. And I think that at the end of the day, it comes down to kind of an innovator's mindset and understanding that, yes, I came up with a great play. And plenty of people are going to copy it. And while they're working on learning that play, I'm working on building the next 10 plays that are going to differentiate me. Yeah. And I'm not necessarily looking to copy other people's plays, but I am trying to learn from other people, masters of their own work. You mentioned Barstool. Barstool's a really interesting company to me, and I've been a fan of Barstool for a long time. I even at one point wanted to partner with them at
Yeah.
Molo, and I got a lot of flack for it. It was something where I talked about it in a company-wide meeting, and again, I tried to be really in tune with our team, especially at the entry level. And a lot of people were turned off by the idea, and I understand why. They've had plenty of controversy in their time. I do think that their CEO, or I'm sorry, the president, founder Dave Portnoy has a great heart. I do think he's crossed some lines, not so much intentionally. It's just kind of the way he's been. But there's some controversy there. But if I'm being perfectly honest, my communication style is very much modeled after his, after him.
Brash and bold. You like it?
Something
Yeah.
about, yeah, just kind of calling it how you see it. Just putting it out there, not being too concerned, trusting that you have the right interests at heart, and that you don't have ill intent with the things they're doing and saying, and then just being yourself. And people really appreciate that about him, and I like to think that that's one of the things my team generally appreciated about me. But I get why people, it's a challenging thing to talk about, but I do want to pivot us to kind of your core business.
Yeah.
So I think you made a great point that the social media being focused on power only, or on trailers specifically, it does tie in very well to the business of FreightVana. I think the first thing I'll ask you to do is kind of describe what FreightVana is meant to be, and kind of how trailers and power only play into this, because I do think it's very different than the average freight broker. And I'd love for you to kind of walk my audience through what that looks
Yeah.
like.
I mean, for us, honestly, on a mission to be uh, a transformative transportation company of the future. And so brokerage is a part of that, right? But core assets on the road, like our trailer fleet, is certainly another part of that. And then, like, we've seen the rise of all these tech and tech and tech. Like, we are certainly tech integrated. We are certainly tech enabled. I have very talented tech team. I think my CTO. You may not, but wildly 2 decades of experience. And so our mission is to create a transportation company. I tell people often that we identify as a broker because we have to have a brokerage MC, but what we're building is a transportation company, right? And part of that build is a heavy leaning into building the nation's largest congruent trailer fleet to be able to unlock the things that people talk about all the time, the long tail of capacity, right? The long tail of capacity, and at the same time compete with the largest asset companies in the country, Andrew, that have dominated certain segments, because quite honestly, what the shippers demand, most traditional freight brokers and even small carriers cannot provide for them, right? Both operationally or nationally, right? If it only helps you in a region, some of these large shippers, you've had all the conversations, like they want their life to be made easier. And so by building something at scale like we intend to do, we feel like we will unlock a lot of the efficiencies and the agilities that a freight broker naturally has, and be able to tap directly into the opportunities and solution engineering that a large asset fleet can provide the largest shippers in the country. So it's a special intersection. It's an emerging category, I'd say. Many people do it at certain levels. My vision and passion for us is we do it at a scale, a level of efficiency, running a certain type of play, going back to our prior analogy, that we just do it at a level where it is elite and ideally category leading in this country.
So I get all that, and what I'd like, because my audience, bear in mind, may have no idea what FreightVana has done.
Yeah.
So you didn't give me a little bit more of the specifics around the trailers, the leasing, what you all have actually done there, because I think that the standard freight broker owns and leases zero equipment. Is simply a middle company between the carriers that move the goods, who own their tractors and trailers, and the shippers that tender the freight out. And that has changed definitely, where some freight brokers are starting to get into some drop trailer type business through managing a trailer pool for carriers or even leasing some trailers, but I don't think many, if any, companies have gone to the length that yours has. So can you give me some of the details behind that so our audience understands?
Yeah. So I think number one, all integrated from a trailer perspective on technology. So that's important. So it's not a cobbled together group of different types of trailers, all logos, similar scat codes. You get that uniformity that most people are looking for, that you would see on social too. So we bring those trailers in. We have north of 600 plus trailers on the road nationally. We are in coast to coast, right? And we deploy those trailers for the largest CPG retailers and manufacturing companies in the country to create the trailer pools that they require, right? But they're all homogeneous, they're all logoed, they're all integrated, and then our carriers can utilize that equipment to obviously run the freight. And then as we build out our network, ideally it just gets even more connected and efficient. Like currently, and you can imagine this, right? Building a freight network for anybody, whether it's trucking or brokerage. People always tell me like, "Oh, what's the network?" I'm like, "Man, I've been doing this 3 years. Yes, we've had good success, but that is not a network, right?" And I just talked a lot about where I came from earlier in your piece here. Like, that's a network. Like what I'm trying to build want to resemble a network, but let's not get it twisted. When you come on the scene, you're a rookie provider, you're growing in a freight recession, and someone's going to give you an opportunity. This might shock you, but for me, I don't exactly get to call up and tell them where and how I get to run and at what price, right? So what I try to tell people is, because everyone's like, oh, what they really love is some of the stuff you and I just talked about when they talk about trailers. They love the marketing. They love the sales. And I always explain it like an iceberg to many. It's like that you're seeing the tip of it and you're like, oh man, trailers, but I'm like, there's this whole piece below the water line and it goes like this. And it's heavy, right? It's heavy on cost. It's heavy on operating demand. You now have to manage assets. Like you have to track assets. Like it creates a completely different beast for you. And so for our team, what we're doing, and for folks that don't know, is we're operating the assets. We're creating efficiencies in our bid process with the assets. We're working with all our partner carriers to keep it safe and make all the breadcrumbs for when they're dropping and picking up and all the pieces. Like it becomes a completely unique build from your traditional freight broker of old.
Yeah. So when I think about it for the audience, I've talked about this at some point. I don't remember with which episode, but when I go out to a Fortune 500 customer of mine and participate in their bid, and MOLO was traditionally a very live load, live unload broker, like 95% of the brokerages out there. We did a little bit of drop trailer, but it was all through partner carriers. But when I looked at Kellogg's bid or I don't know, Anheuser-Busch's bid or Molson Coors or really any enterprise Fortune 500 company, the lion's share of the bid was segmented out for drop trailer business. Why? Because it was easier for the shipper to manage that way. Detention was a way smaller issue in this case. It gave them the flexibility to manage their freight better. And most brokers couldn't do that. And it was frustrating to know you put in all this effort to support a customer, a large customer you spent maybe 2-3 years working to get in with. And then when push came to shove and you were bidding on the freight, you could only tap into 20 or 30% of the available business. So there's definitely an angle where it makes a lot of sense to get into leasing or owning trailers because, again, you just get to tap into a bigger piece of the pie. The challenge, though, when I think about your business is when you start with all the trailers, there's certainly the advantage of when you go to a Molson Coors or whoever it is, a shipper, and say, hey, I've got trailers for you. The sales process should be shorter because you have something that they need. You have something that they want. But you don't have established rapport. You haven't been hauling for multiple years for them. So you're not exactly getting your pick of the litter with the freight. And you don't have a network. You don't have a ton of freight to build this off of, a ton of relationships and carriers and customers to just throw the trailers into. One could argue the most feasible way to go about something like this is to build a $500 million brokerage traditionally and then go lease 600 trailers. And it would be way easier to throw those 600 trailers in and use them efficiently in a network like that. But I'm certainly not saying what you did was wrong. That's not at all what
Time will
I'm
tell. You
alluding to.
might
I'm
be
just
right.
alluding
Yeah.
to that.
Yeah.
I'm just alluding to that what you're doing is probably very challenging.
Incredibly.
So, can you talk a little bit about what the challenge was like as you first got started, having all these trailers and finding a way to put them to work
Yeah.
and to get the customers to create an efficient, even if it's just as efficient as saying, hey, I've got one customer from Phoenix to LA and another from LA to Phoenix. We're going to throw 5 trailers in both of their yards and we're going to run 3 loads a day. Let's go. I mean, is that kind of how it
Well,
starts, one at a
no,
time?
you
I
get
mean,
the one lane at a time, and then you're really seeking the backside. Very rarely will you get the contiguous looping. We do have some shorter haul stuff that we can compete on, right, where the trailer's not going to leave the market. The one piece that I think you'd left out, in addition to all the challenges, and then do it in a freight recession, a 30-month freight recession.
oh yeah, where people don't need any new
I
help.
don't need new capacity. To your point, yeah, I do have drop trailers, but I'm trying to keep all my current folks whole. Um, And honestly, as we look at, you talk about that inflection point on talent, as we look to inflect this business, I think our results, I would say a ton of passion and talent against it, is really starting to question people like, well, if you can accomplish this in the face of that, then what can you accomplish in a balanced market? What can you accomplish in an inflationary market? And I think that really gets where our business gets interesting. But no doubts, when you're starting, it's the hardest. But when you started, it was the hardest for you too, just different problems, right? Those doors aren't open. You're still
Yep.
walking in saying, hey, I'm with, Touch of Modern, and I'm trying to, haul this freight for you, right? And they're like, yeah, I've got, all the logos. And you're like, no, but I can. And they're like, yeah, but we already got that, right? So I guess I'd highlight it that it is a lot of like talent and belief, man. And like, I feel like there's this intersection specifically for us in this category that's underserved. And I think that's what's really special, because sometimes that is really where you have to sell. Because I always tell people, if you're just selling on price, we've seen people try to just sell on price. And in this market, I'm not sure if that's the best way to win. If you feel like you could only, now, hey, if you've got the buying power and the horsepower that we know the logos and you can get there, then that's great. But if you're a new entrant, you really have no business winning on price unless you've got a lot of money to invest on that burn. And I think, we just haven't set up our business that way. So incredibly challenging, to your point. You're building out a network, but I would tell you this, the way we show up, the way we execute, people first have their doubts like, well, this isn't going to be this. And then like, how are you going to do this? But you said it to your team. Momentum begets momentum. Well, now I can pick up a phone and say, hey, you have doubts? Don't believe me, call this person. Oh, you have doubts? Don't believe me, call this person. And then they tell our story for them, which is such a, like, that referral network or that validation network of like, hey, Shannon's team is legit. Their equipment, legit. When they say they'll do something, legit. And so that momentum begets momentum, and we're still in the absolute crap marketplace. So I just, going back to those underdog days and going back to just being an undersized kid on a sports field, like I particularly like it. Like I like playing from behind, or people having the doubts, or, hey, like, obviously you quit a job and, half the people are wishing you success and half the people are like, there's no way that's going to work. Right. And I'm a twisted dark energy person. Like I vibe with the half that's like, oh yeah, that's not going to work. Like that's what plays in my head, just on a rotational loop and everything, right? Like I do it for my people, but then there's this dark angel that's like, hey, remember that person? Remember this person? Remember that comment? And it's just like logs on the fire that drive me, man.
Yeah, you and I are cut from the same cloth then, because I thrive off of doubters. And I remember shit for 4 years that was based on a one-off conversation from someone who probably didn't even care that much. But in that moment, to me, they exhibited a level of doubt that fueled me for years. I really do love that stuff. So I get where you're coming from with respect to that.
And it's always been a thing for me. And like, you
So,
can fight it or you can just embrace it and then and hey, not let it go too far, right? Like, don't just only see darkness. But when I need it, like I can tap into that at any given time when I feel like I need that jolt.
yep. Can you, so you mentioned winning
Yeah.
awards, and I think that's a really pivotal piece to the growth story in our industry. I saw it for us at Mola. It was Anheuser-Busch that was the first kind of company that, first of all, I appreciated always that they were the first real enterprise shipper to give us a
Yeah.
chance. And my account manager on that, I told him like day one, you do whatever it takes to make sure we're the number one performing carrier in their network. And when we learned they had a carrier award process, our whole team was rallying around the fact that we could win that. And within 3 years, we did. And we were named their carrier of the year. And I mean, I was putting that in front of every other shipper that I was selling to. And it makes it a little easier when, we can all say we're great at this and that. But when someone else says it for you, I think it speaks a little louder. So I'll first congratulate you and your team because you did just win I think broker of the year or carrier of the year award for Ace Hardware,
Correct.
right?
Yeah. Just found out 2 weeks ago, man. It was special, special career moment to your point.
Yeah, because to me, I mean, when I think about the proudest moment of my career was when we won the award for Anheuser
Was
Busch.
it
It wasn't when we sold the
really?
company. It wasn't when we started the company. Oh, 100%. There's actually a meme, or not a meme, an emoji in the Molo system of me holding the award. I think there's tears in my eyes. I was literally crying on screen showing our team this award because we had put so much effort into that. That was the accumulation of all of the effort that we had put into building. That it was our vision being realized in real time. And there's such a level of appreciation when people are willing to work so hard on behalf of a vision you've created for them that they're all in on, and it comes together, it culminates in that. That to me was a very special thing. So talk to me about your relationship to Ace. When did you first start hauling for them?
First,
And how did you get to this point now of being their top
yeah.
provider?
Hey, I think it's funny. Great story, right? And to your point, I'll go chronologically because that's how you like to flow. So I guess go back to 21, right? And we're just reaching out to people, trying to meet people, tell them what we're about, tell them what we want to build. And I would give credit to that team. It's the back end of 21, so you still got a little bit of COVID overhang. The market hasn't started crapping in 22. Talk about what we want to do, our model, and kudos to that team. Like, took the time to meet us, didn't have to, asked a ton of questions, which I was like, I literally almost missed a flight because we end up in like a 30-minute call. But now their leadership team just like peppering questions. And I'm like, I'm used to just like, hey, time's up. Hey, thanks, guys. Oh, right? Like, we're all out of here. Like, I set up the time for you. But like, there's a vibe to it. And like, look, when you're starting out, let's be honest, there's not a lot of people vibing and you're not back in, like, everyone's just not engaged. But this particular group was very engaged, these particular people, who I endear at this point of my career. And so I literally can't make I'm almost about to miss my flight. Don't even have time to go to long-term parking. We race out of our first headquarters. I'm like, Andrew, you got to drop me at the curb because I can't even do parking. And like, I barely make this flight, all because, right, like, we had this crazy talk that ended up going over 30, 45 minutes, but it's just all the right vibes, as the term the kids would use, right? It's all the right vibes, all the right questions, and it's like exactly the type of conversations like I dreamed of having. And they gave us opportunities, tough ones to start. My teams talk about the first terrible lanes we had and the first tough stuff we did. And dude, we just a testament to my team, really. I mean, that's really, when you talk about tears in the eyes, we grew the relationship, multiple facets of their business, and they've always just believed in us. And we stuck by them through the market shift in 22 when it shifted downwards. They've stuck by us, and we've just created a relationship very similar to our business model of like, we don't want to, our goal is not to take you to the penthouse, but like, hey, we need good partners here to be able to sustain what we need to build. And they've believed in that as a team. And I think, having a group like Ace with their 100-year history and their people, and now their planning teams, and now their executives that, You want to talk about first what was cool. So we sit in this meeting, I'll go to the conference, right? So we're sitting there, you know the deal. You're sitting in front of 120 of your peers. I know we do a lot for them, but I'm not in their walls. I don't know exactly who else is working there. You got the biggest and the baddest, every name you would know, asset, non-asset. Don't even know they're doing awards. They've never done awards before. So you want to talk about first of first? They've never done awards.
That's
We get
cool.
to the end, and their guy Andy stands up and he's like, "Hey, we got some first. We're gonna do awards." And I literally, like, I think I put my hand on Andrew's like thigh next to me, and I was like, "Oh, bro, I'm either this is gonna be either really great or really, really, really bad 5 minutes." And it was just like, then it was just this moment where usually I'm highly like, like whatever. I'm a pretty composed cat, but I was just like, that was a long few minutes, and they got to it, and they announced us, and your tears, you had the award. I walked up, I think I fumbled the award, it fell on the ground, like just out of sorts, man, because it was a culmination, and then the word you didn't use but I would use, it's just a validation, you know, for
Oh yeah.
so much heart and spirit and hard work, and for have someone else validate you and believe that what you bring to the table was worthwhile. And man, we walked out of that. I set up an immediate Teams call with my team back here in Phoenix. And I sold that we were almost getting kicked out of the network, is how I precursored the deal.
Yep.
My ops manager's still angry at me because I was like, "Hey guys, we win together, we lose together. You know the mission, and like I got bad news, and like they just looked to make." And then I was like, "But I guess they felt this way, and they gave us the Carrier of the Year award." And he was like, "You SOB!" Like he was so pissed, and then everyone was going crazy, bro. But I agree. Like if I look back, and I don't know what the moments will be, but out of my 3 years, but between all the darkness and the ups and the downs and the wins and the losses, like that is a paramount moment when you feel like you're sitting there and it all comes together, and then you can share it like you did with your team. I just, that's literally my why, like why I do what I do, and it was just a crazy cool moment that I never want to forget.
Yep. I mean, you explaining that just took me right back
It's
to
beautiful, man.
our own situation there. It is a really cool thing when you can see your team following through on what you all set out to do, and then the validation is a great word to describe the feeling you get when a customer validates you and validates the mission that you and your team set out to accomplish. So from there, let's talk about where the business is today, and like where do you see this thing going at this point? What does the team still need? I mean, you're like power only is still like, what percentage of the business is power only, and
Oh,
how do you see yourself in the market? When do you think you get to the place of being like a truly efficient network with the 600 trailers that you're moving around the
oh yeah,
country? What's still needed to get
yeah.
there? Talk a little bit
I
about all
think
that.
like it won't look dissimilar probably from, you've seen other brands yourself expand, right? You start to take jumps, right? And so for us, it's a capital expansion for us, and we'll go invest in larger sales team, certainly invest in all the operations, heavy tech focus. So nothing too dissimilar from, I think, the standard build. We do want to have the ability to make the bets and grow the trailer fleet, which is capital intensive, right? So our P&L, our capital stack will look different. It's funny you mentioned density, because I've had people ask, I've never done it, right? Because I've only worked at a place that had 60,000 loads a week and then zero. So so I'm a little messed up, right? Like you want to talk barbells? Like I'm trying to figure out how to live in the middle, maybe differently. Um, but I would tell you that, like, I think there's this ability for us to scale like that. I think the initial stages, the customer interest, the awards, the people that are willing to invest in a different type of solution, unique, but that really lies heavily, much like you hung the hat on execution and communication, and never relents on that. Jody asked me the other day. She's like, "Hey, like, really good question, right? It's day 7 for her. This is how she thinks." She's like, "What are the things years from now that like you absolutely won't relent on?" And I was like, "Our culture and our service." Right? And so for us, like that
Mm-hmm.
is my burning. So now everything I do has to make sure that I'm trying to live up to that creed. Because if our culture and our service live there, I think the rest is dominoes, because I think the talent's there. I think the ambition's there. I think the carrier and the shipper desire's there. But I have to make sure that we don't lose sight of those two things. So that those two are paramount for me. We'll continue to expand at a rate that I think will maybe surprise some, maybe not all. There'll certainly be people like that want to follow along and are big people with big capital stacks that would like to do it. But what I learned inside corporate America also, and these people that also work in corporate America today will tell you, sometimes it's easier to be a little bit more free in regards to decisioning and scale, and that agility that you get by sitting like where I sit is much different inside the walls of, all the institutions that may have ambitions. Very hard to change a tiger's stripes. And so, I like our chances of being a pure play. I like our chances of being able to do it from the ground up and take all those learnings. I think that's a special place to sit, and I don't think most people will want or have desires to necessarily chart that course in the short term, which gives us a really nice competitive advantage.
I agree. I'm curious, you mentioned service and the importance of service and execution. I'm curious, does having power only as a, like, if I just compare a traditional live load, live unload, where I have the load, I find a carrier who has their own equipment, they pick it up and deliver. How does service compare in terms of the ability to execute for a live load, live unload carrier situation to a power only where it's your own trailer? Does it get more challenging? Are there potential for more risks at some point? Like, help me understand
slightly
that.
Different ecosystem, right? Because when live, it's built either a certain way. You can have contracts that are live. As you and I both know, you have all the flexibility of a lot of different optionality on the backside if your option one doesn't work. For a way we operate trailers, majority of that is committed business. So now we have to build the networks, make sure we got trailer balancing in that. So live has its benefits and its drawbacks. From a service perspective, we're really good, but we got committed business, we've got committed carriers, we've got committed routes, we've got decent volumes. There's always, variability in that. But I guess I'd say, like, for us, our service is really high end. And then it's your execution, but it's also, as you know, your communication behind it. So that is where we thrive. The other one that I would share with you that is very interesting and incredibly marketable, in case you're looking to invest, but we could talk about that offline. I'm just kidding. But is security, right? If you talk about the biggest buzzwords in sports for us, it's security. And because of our trailers, because of our assets, because of the connectivity, because of the cargo sensors, because of the other stuff we're doing, we have an immaculate, very strong service record for freight when it runs on our trailer. So now, not only do they get service execution, they also get security. So I'm not trying to shy away from the coverage piece, but I am trying to shy away how the options differ, and then obviously the marketability of when you're running the asset fleet the way we operate ours is.
So every one of your trailers has tracking ability on it and cargo sensors for if the weight shifts. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah, it could be inopportune unloading. It could just be for trailer dwell. It could just be for automated yard reports. All the different pieces you get with cargo sensors on every single trailer that we do.
Got it. So does that mean that fraud is a smaller issue for you than the average broker?
When it's operating on our equipment, yes, for sure, 100%.
So you're selling the crap out of that in this market?
Yes. Naturally.
Good for you. I would be too. Talk about a buzzword. Freight fraud is the number one thing most talked about in our industry today.
It's brutal, man. We just had Travelers was visiting us yesterday, and absolutely wild, right? Absolutely wild where it's gone in the last few years. It's going to reach epic levels this year, driven by a lot of stuff that we can get into at a later time. But I think it's an interesting tipping point where Travelers specifically is seeing many, instead of kind of the old adage of hey, it's your problem, it's your problem, it's your problem. You've lived that life. You've sat in the seat, right? Or even in the carrier life, it's your problem, it's your problem. Now I think what Travelers is seeing is, because it's such a massive problem, and in order to solve it, much like any other problem to solve, it takes collaboration, it takes people meeting in the middle. The simple "it's your problem" is not solving the problem, and so the blowback now is, and the good thing, I say that not blowback, the evolution is now that I think we will get shippers and a brokerage community into rooms, and we'll start figuring out how do we improve this together. I think that's going to be an evolution that you and I both watch over the next few years, and it won't be just solved on one end. Almost impossible. And I think you have to have the motivation. Out of all the pain that this market has created, Andrew, I think the motivation loop has also been created for shippers and brokers to really sit down and start solving this at a macro level together, because it's getting to a point where it's costing us all way too much time, way too much capital. And now this is that pain point where I think will cause some investments and change from both parties.
Yeah, I'm curious about that. I agree with you that this is a problem that is costing everyone too much. It would be interesting to see our industry elevate the collaboration beyond the standard shipper broker, shipper carrier, broker carrier relationship that's, transactional or even contractual, but like focused solely on moving goods from A to B. To see that collaboration elevate to a more sophisticated relationship where everyone is investing in a collective solution to, everyone wins in a scenario where we can end or significantly reduce fraud in the industry. Everyone wins. And it is definitely a way harder problem for you to solve on your own, for me to solve on my own, for a shipper to solve on their own. It's way harder that
impossible.
way.
And I hate to hang that because I'm not the impossible guy, but like you alone, no chance. Me alone, no chance. Like you could take the biggest ones that we all know the names. Alone, no chance. You've got to have that meet in the middle. And I think that was the coolest thing in my takeaway. We had multiple hours with them yesterday. My team learned a ton. That was the one thing that just kind of bore a hole in my head. It's like, maybe now is the time where we really start collaborating and talking about, hey, instead of passing the buck and us, rejecting a thing, like how do we solve the problem together? Here's what I know. Here's what other people are doing. How do we share best practices? Where are your gaps? Let's just be honest, right? And let's own the problem together, because otherwise it's the back and forth and it's not healthy, and then we never go anywhere.
Yep, 100%. So, all right, I think we're going to end with that.
Well, hey, I'm glad I made the cut on the panel in Tennessee. Then we got to do the freight pod.
You did great.
So I feel like next time you may actually call me for dinner next time we're in the same city. Like our relationship is just, it's crescendoing to a point. I can't even imagine what you and I in a few years.
I'm with you. I love it. So dinner on me next time I see you. Next time I'm in your town or when you're in Chicago, we'll see. It, so. To our audience, thanks so much for listening. Hope you got some value out of Shannon's story, out of the FreightVana story, out of our conversation today, and we'll see you next week. Have a good one.